Over the last 20 years with social media, we've been in this age of attention where social media has focused on really stealing our attention. But with AI companionship moving forward, it's focused on stealing our attachment, and that becomes very dangerous.
Hey, if an AI bot can give my wife better companion than I can, then my bar needs to be raised quite a bit.
One of the shifts that is happening is we've shifted from an industrial economy to a knowledge economy to what could be more of a wisdom economy, and that what is valued is the ability to be a multidisciplinary thinker, to have discernment, to draw from a number of different places and fields, and to adapt quickly.
If you could get people interested in things that they like and they enjoy, they would learn. Competency breeds confidence. So someone who likes something will feel competent in it, and they will enjoy it and feel confident in it. And I think we need to do way more of that in learning instead of getting kids sitting down for 8 hours a day on topics that they absolutely hate, giving them many choices to pursue passions and exploration and explore and learn.
It's not just what is the AI going to be able to do and at what time frame. It's also what are humans going to be willing to concede in terms of trust in that, because of the healthcare or the relationship between a patient and a caregiver is pretty important.
One of the questions underneath the question is, what sort of role does my occupation play in forming my sense of identity and self? Because a lot of people take pride in saying, I am a doctor, I am a graphic designer. And if your sense of meaning and self is so deeply tied to that, then you and who you are can be replaced pretty quickly.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Whole Future Podcast. We created this podcast to help you as a leader and your family remain whole, connected, and grounded in this age of AI. So during this show, what we'll do is we'll discuss recent trends and research shaping the way we understand work, money, health, family, and leadership. But I want to kick off today by introducing my co-creators. We have Max Hansen with us, who is the founder and CEO of Y Scouts, an executive recruiting firm focused on helping organizations hire purpose-driven and aligned leaders. Max, welcome back.
Thanks for having me again.
Jared Kredit is the president and owner of K2 Electric, an Arizona-based electrical contractor focused on building strong teams, genuine relationships, and high-performing projects. Jared, welcome back.
Looking forward to it.
And now our featured guest, we have Jim Mullins on today, who's the lead pastor of Redemption Church in Tempe, Arizona. Jim has actually been one of my pastors for over 10 years. He's been a good friend of mine. He's one of the most creative, thoughtful, innovative thinkers as it relates to work and faith. So Jim, I'm really excited to have you on this episode with us.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
One thing I believe at Pursue Whole, and part of this podcast, is that some of the greatest breakthroughs in the world began with a single act, and that act is asking the right questions. So when we stop asking questions, we start to degrade ourselves as a society. But when we ask the right kind of questions, it helps us stay curious, but it also helps us to stay humble because there's a lot of things that we don't know. So I want to kick off this time today by asking you guys, what is one big question that you've either been asking yourself or others that has brought a lot of insight to you lately?
I'll kick us off. Something I've been talking, this is more on the business front, but how as an organization do we keep an eye on what worked in the past while we're still moving forward? And I'm asking this, some of it's as we're talking about some AI stuff, but some of it's just some basic change management that we're going through and some areas where we've gotten off track. It's like, how do we keep that where we're moving the business forward, but we're also not losing track of what worked in the past? Because I think that's super important foundationally, because we need to build off of that, not detach from it. So just how to keep that balance and not just go down the future road without checking back in on what was working before.
One of the big questions, I think, on the family side, last week I shared more on business. This time I want to share a little bit more on the family is, how do I push and drive my boys to help them achieve who I believe that they are, but at the same time, not push so hard that I crush and collapse them in their sense of self-worth. And sometimes I get that, sometimes I get it wrong. And my wife gives me feedback, my kids give me feedback. And that's something that I want to continue to grow and develop in this season of life is, how do I pour into my kids and believe that there's more inside of them, while at the same time not pushing them so far that they start to feel insecure or not good enough. And that's something that I'm personally trying to work through.
Got it. I'll jump in. That's good, Andy. I think the question that I'm asking is I think we all ask ourselves this question at some point, but what lesson is life trying to teach me right now? And the reason behind that is I'm about to go into a major surgery for cancer. And so I'm just trying to figure out like what this has to offer me, because I always believe that there's a lesson to be learned in anything we do.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'd say for me, the question is, what is the smallest possible change that will have the biggest impact? I ask this vocationally, interpersonally, but it's a shift from asking the question of what's the biggest, most impactful change, but scaling it back to say, what's the small thing that has the biggest impact?
Those are fantastic. And we're going to need some of that because we're talking about some big ideas today about AI companionship, education, autonomous vehicles, humanoid robots, and AI as our pseudo god. So we have some big conversations. Jim, I'm excited for you to join us. So let's kick it off on education. I'm going to share some stats here. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can look at these on the screen. But as far as education goes, computer science degrees declined recently. So undergraduate computer science enrollment is actually down 8.1%, and graduate computer science enrollment is down 14% in the fall of 2025. So for 10 years, computer science was one of the fastest growing majors in the US, and that has drastically started to drop. And I really feel like over the last really 6 months, we thought that coding could get replaced by AI, and then it totally did in 6 months. So it happened very fast. The other important note here is that the US tech sector employment dropped 57,000 over the past year, and that's worse than the 2008 and 2020 downturns. So let's just pause for a second here and discuss what is happening in the tech space and how do we get prepared for that with our kids and also just in the education system in general.
With the education thing, the first thing that came to mind, and I run with that and I think that through, but I actually think the it's more in my perspective of those numbers. It feels more like the best way to articulate it for me. I'm always trying to figure it out, trying to solve it, which probably isn't the best way to look at this because some of it we're not going to know until it actually we see the aftermath of it. But I think the ROI of education has changed. And I think I'm in the hiring side and hiring is the proof, but I think the market is still values education, but I think now education's more self-directed and I think it's leveled the playing field. And I think the market's trying to figure that out. I will also say on that side, I always use examples from my world. My son goes to SMU and there's nothing that will replace the community and the interactions that he's having at that university. So there's something that we can talk further into that as we talk about education, but there's something that they're doing where it's changing him as a man, young man, and really enabled him to give him confidence and communication and all the things that are super vital. But I think that stat alone, if I had to try to troubleshoot it, and I know we're not necessarily trying to troubleshoot it, we're just talking about it, but it has to do with the self-directed learning using AI now, which I think is probably the best way to use AI, in my opinion, is to figure out how to learn from it. So that's my quick take on it.
Yeah, I think a couple of things that come up for me is that purely an indication of what's happening in AI and the ability for AI to write code. And I'm sure there's a contribution there. But if you think about the shift, like in the marketplace, was it lagging in terms of its adjustment or people, what they were enrolling in? Was that lagging from market forces that already existed? Essentially, did we have too many people getting computer science degrees anyways? Which then gets into the conversation, is there too many people going to college? Because kind of like what Max was talking about, my biggest contention, what I got the most value out of was not specifically the classes I went to. I think there was a little bit of how to think that I got out of university, but it was more of that detachment from home and living out, in some ways, not great things, right? Going and experiencing, but it was like this testing phase. And so that was super important for me, less so than necessarily what I specifically studied. So I think as we talk about education, is like, how do you make that experience to become an independent adult? And is there a cheaper way to do it than going and getting a college degree? And also, what degree program do you pick that's going to maybe not be because I would contend that most don't give you like a ton of specific experience that's helpful. It's just foundational. So like computer science, okay, maybe that doesn't make sense. But at the same time, you're still going to need people that understand it at a very deep level to be behind the AI. So is it totally an AI thing, or was there an excess of people getting CS degrees that's also contributing to that? Because like you said, this is only 6 months ago, and some of these stats predate that. So I think this was in motion even potentially before the threat of AI when it comes to coding and programming.
I have a buddy who is a coder, and he does a lot of this work, and he knows a lot of people who are professional coders and are really good at what they do. And I was talking to him about some of these stats and just the changes in coding in general. And he has a buddy who's really high up in coding. And he essentially said he doesn't code anymore. What he does is he stands above the code and monitors what AI writes and looks for indiscrepancies. He takes his 10 to 20 years of wisdom and knowledge and looks for oversight on what the coding is doing. And I looked at him and I said, "Is that fulfilling for him?" And he says, "Absolutely not." He got into it to stay up late at night to code for 12 hours, looking at a black screen and figuring out puzzle pieces. And now he's standing above it, simply just monitoring and managing the skills that he wanted to do. But now he doesn't have a job there. He has to play this oversight role. So computer science is one of those industries, and we'll get into this in a little bit here, where people love the craft of the industry, but they're forced to move up to a management and oversight of the skill, which really is not where they find a sense of purpose and fulfillment.
I think one of the shifts is happening is we've shifted from an industrial economy to a knowledge economy to what could be more of a wisdom economy, and that what is valued is the ability to be a multidisciplinary thinker, to have discernment, to draw from a number of different places and fields, and to adapt quickly. I have a curiosity about some of the statistics that you've mentioned. One is, does some of that represent people bypassing education and learning on their own? Because anecdotally, I work with a lot of college students who were in some of these majors and are pulling out of those majors because the accessibility to learning and information is way more available to them. Furthermore, I've heard of some people making the shift into the humanities so that they have this, they're being taught how to think, how to navigate, how to discern, and that being skills that can transfer through the different shifts that happen in our world.
Let's go on to this next slide because this is something that I've thought about a lot, which is what are the fundamental key kind of questions that this next generation is going to ask? And actually, one of those key questions that I perceive that the next generation is going to ask about formal education is, what is the point? What's the point of going to school to become a doctor, a surgeon, going to business school, marketing, graphic design, lawyer, accountant, finance, or certified financial planner? These right here are all four things, or all things that I would say are on the chopping block for better use, that we were taught: go to school, get a good degree, you'll get paid a really high salary. And these are actually the jobs that are starting to, the roles inside of those jobs are starting to deteriorate first. So there's this feeling of apathy that I can imagine people having of, if machines and AI can go faster, they can do it better, it's quicker. Last time I brought up the idea that pictures that were created are now basically 1 cent compared to $1 for what humans are able to produce. It costs 1 cent for AI to create a similar image that looks pretty much identical. So to me, that is one of the big questions. I would love for your reflection on that. And also, if you think there's another big question that kind of the younger generation is going to start asking as it relates to education.
Yeah, I think it's very real. My 13-year-old got in a conversation with my wife, and probably a little bit my fault because I have conversations with him about some of this, and he does really well in school. So certainly, let's say he's like the model kid to go to university, if you were to think about it that way, because I run a trade business, so I'm a big fan of the trades, and I do not believe that everyone should go to university, especially based on how their school experience goes before that. But he qualifies, but he's contemplating that, and I think there's still a high probability he will. But to Jim's point is, you got to really think about what you're going to go pursue and what you're going to try and achieve out of that, because it's less, in my opinion, about like the specialty of the degree program and again, more like how are you learning how to think and how is it making you more adaptable as you go along? But some of those that you listed, I also believe there needs to be less people going into them, but high caliber people going into them. And an attorney is one that to me is like a super relevant example right now. I am dealing with something, a vendor contract issue. I spent some time in an LLM, sent some letters. I worked at an impasse. And so now I'm engaging an attorney. So I was able to progress, call it like a junior associate. I didn't really need them, but now I'm at a point where I do need a highly intelligent lawyer. And more than anything, I need a lawyer to go against the lawyer on the other side. And so it's like the need's still there, but I bypassed, call it 40, 50% of what I would have normally done. So it doesn't eliminate it, it just reduces the amount. But the person that I need is, I don't want that junior associate. I want the more experienced person.
So to hit on that real quick, if AI is at the worst point it'll ever be, the dumbest point at which it will ever be, the most incompetent point it'll ever be, and it'll only get better, at what point do you not just have AI's lawyers going to the other AI lawyer and then they have a rebuttal that's better than what a human can write and then they have a rebuttal, but you need the humans to show up in person or on site to basically deliver. It's fascinating because once these things get smarter, better in most areas, at what point do you just have an AI kind of talking to someone else's AI?
But not
Yeah.
far away.
Yeah.
So then
Yeah.
what is the role of the human in that as it relates to what we go to school for? And Jim, I want to hear your thought. Then I want to go to another stat here that we can chew on as far as the medical field.
I think one of the questions underneath the question is what sort of role does my occupation play in forming my sense of identity and self? Because a lot of people take pride in saying, I am a doctor, I am a graphic designer. And if your sense of meaning and self is so deeply tied to that, then you and who you are can be replaced pretty quickly. But underneath that, there are deeper questions of where do you derive that sense of self? And even in the unique distinctiveness that you bring to the table, maybe it's tied less to an occupation and more to a proclivity of the way you're made to be that can have different expressions in different industries.
I think it's definitely shifting. I think there's a human that's going to have to make those decisions. Now, the decisions may be fewer and bigger decisions. So it's a bigger game with bigger stakes. And I think that's a capitalistic like way to think about it. But I think when I was chewing on this, I think people used to view like credentials and then their job and then stability. I think the whole equation's just different now. I think it's like identity to Jim's point is like figuring out, getting comfortable with who you are, actually figuring out like the skill stack, like what you can actually do, and then leveraging that for opportunity, which is a whole different flow. And I don't think we're quite used to that because people are still going to college and getting an education and getting knowledge when knowledge is still valuable, but it's not quite as valuable as it was before because that's one thing that AI has in spades. But I would double down on it. Just makes understanding your identity that much more important because that's the only thing that's going to be static no matter what happens moving forward. So I think, Jim, we're great to have you on the show, by the way. Great call out.
When I brought up that question of what is the point, I think what you're saying, Max, is we've trained ourselves and the next generations to go to school for the purpose of money and a purpose of identity and a role. That's why they're saying, what's the point? Because I'm not going to be better, faster, smarter. But the point is that you find out what is your passion and purpose in this world and how do you want to create a positive impact in the lives of others. That actually becomes the new point, not how do I get a good paying job? Because in our last conversation, we talked about the potential of money not even being a core element of the American economy or the world economy in the future at some point. That's starting to shift. And it is getting back to the central core foundation of the point is not to go get a good job so you can make money. It is to go figure out who you are, how you want to impact the world, and bring about a sense of goodness and human flourishing, which I love. I think that's beautiful. I think we're going to have to figure out these elements of like, how do we work hard and how do we have grit and how do we have discipline and endurance, which is going to be another problem. But I do want to go to the stat on the medical field because this was intriguing to me. If you just look at basically a medical doctorate degree, so you have 4 years as an undergrad. And I have one of our good friends is a medical doctor. He's fantastic. He's one of the smartest people I know. I love medical doctors. I love that they use AI. It helps me, it helps them. But then medical school is 4 years. You do residency for 5 to 7 years, and you might even pick up a fellowship for 1 to 2 years. The average surgeon salary is between $300,000 to $700,000, and the typical student loan debt is between 300 and 600. And I actually feel like that's pretty low. But you're doing 13 to 17 hours of training. And here's some of the new stats. So Microsoft AI Diagnostic correctly diagnosed 85% of cases described in the New England Journal of Medicine. These were very difficult diagnosis cases. That's 4 times higher than what humans were able to diagnose them at. And if you go through this list, now remember as you look at this list, this is the worst AI will ever be at this stuff. So skin cancer detection, AI is beating medical doctors. Melanoma sensitivity, AI is beating doctors at a 20% gap. Ovarian cancer staging, a 10% gap, AI is winning. Then you have medical knowledge exams, AI is blowing that out of the water, and then complex case diagnosis. Okay, so with these scenarios, to me, this is shocking because what it's really showing, if this is the worst that it's ever going to be, I think about this and we can apply this to lawyers, medical doctors, graphic designers, but what does the new role become of these professions and these skills? And how do we train up our kids and our teams to anchor back into the foundational skills that are going to actually make a point and matter? So I'd love your 2 cents on these stats and just in general where things are headed.
I definitely think it changes it. It's not just what is AI capable of, but what will humans adapt to and at what speed? Because I could tell you, I don't know that my dad is going to trust that. And he's got his GP and he likes him, he knows him, there's trust. I would say I'm probably still in an age band where like I'll probably do a mix, and that's where I'm at today. I'll come in, I go see a naturopath mostly. I usually show up and I've done a bunch of research, and then I'm asking her because I do want that human interaction input because I'm still limited in the questions I know to ask and like the framing around how should I think about this. Now, to your point, this is the worst that it's at. And then you're going to have, say, my children's generation where they may have most of their experience is more of an interaction with AI on, hey, talk to me about this or that with my health. But I think when we talk about this, it's not just what is the AI going to be able to do and at what time frame. It's also what are humans going to be willing to concede in terms of trust in that, because of the healthcare or the relationship between a patient and a caregiver is pretty important. And my best hope is that there is still some place for it. Again, probably less of them, but still some place for it, because I think that human interaction is important, especially when you get into things where it's like, it's really bad news. And so it's not just a question of what's the diagnosis, but it's like, what's the path forward? And sometimes that's, hey, let's figure out how to make you as comfortable as possible. And I think having the care of a human involved in that does matter. But tying it back to education, and back to this idea of, am I doing this monetarily or for the significance of it? Or am I going to be a physician because I feel called and I feel a purpose in this? Because I think you're going to need that grounding, because especially on the financial side, that might slip even further than it already has. It's already been the case in the medical field.
But it might speed up. Maybe it doesn't have to be 15 years. What if it could be 3 years and we enhance the competency of someone and we create skills where maybe it's a lot of more micro learning, less like broad knowledge of know everything in the medical industry, but you learn one thing. Max, I love your opinion because you're going through a medical condition right now. How have you used AI? Can you imagine a world maybe 5 years from now if AI was in the medical field, how that could enhance your experience overall?
I've been thinking about this a lot. I think, how do I use AI? Obviously, I get any lab results or anything, I'm going to listen to what my doctor says, and I'm also going to go to my LLM and say, hey, help me understand this. And it's actually really good at telling you, hey, you need to worry about this and not about this. And it's really good in combination with the doctor. But I think When I think about it, AI definitely replaces expertise. It may shrink down how quickly you can get degrees. I think that would be the right thing, but it won't, in my opinion, replace judgment completely. A human has to be behind the decision, and there'll still be, I believe, somebody with a license to make that final call. Now, AI can help get all the way probably to that. So then you start asking the question is like, who owns the decision, not necessarily the data, because everybody has access to the data. And I think I was thinking about this the other day. This sucks for people that needed to be the smartest person in the room because everybody's the smartest person in the room if they just have any insight as to ask and be more of a pull situation and ask questions. So I think it's less about who the smartest person in the room is and more about the best like decision architects. Like how do you build like a few steps in order to get to the best outcome? But I will say on the health side, because I've had to use it for getting the cancer diagnostic, it has really helped me to quickly understand what the doctor's even talking about. So I'm not solely relying on the doctor, but they're helping me make the final decision. So it's been an interesting, and I think even since I started going down the path of, hey, you have to get an MRI, it's even gotten better. Like the MRIs, I've gotten full body scans and additional MRIs. And now either the cancer got worse, which could have a little bit, or the technology is getting better. And I think the technology is getting better because now it's finding it without even having to point it to that area. It's calling it right out on I went to a Pronovo body scan separate from all my other stuff. And it found that instantly. That was the top thing it has in my app is like, hey, you need to go get this checked out. Anyway, that's my take is I still think there's a world where competent leaders will still have to make the final judgment, which I'm excited about because it's just empowering them to with data in order to make that judgment.
This is one of the industries that I am actually pretty I'm leaning positively towards and the role that the AI might have because what's the number one complaint that people have with their doctors is that there's not enough time. And this could create a higher degree of relational connection with the doctors. And I think knowing some of those who've been through med school, how much time they just spend learning terminology, memorizing terminology, that time could be spent learning leadership, good question asking, relational skills, how to good bedside manner, and how to care for people who are going through very life changing things. We could end up with better doctors because the AI is taking care of a lot of the technical things very efficiently in the background and allowing them to relationally make the connections and make the broader decisions.
I think that's
I
that just brought a really interesting thought. Is like you could wind up with different doctors
Yeah.
because the way your brain works and your capacity to retain a ton of information is the only way through the MCAT and med school. So you could wind up with wholly different people that get into the field if that barrier goes away, which I think could be interesting. And to your point, you could have maybe higher empath. Not to say doctors don't have that, but folks with higher empath now it's less of a barrier.
the administration of medicine in the relationship is one of the most important key factors, I think, because when we were in therapy, when I got my master's degree, we looked at this chart of therapeutic outcomes, like what makes therapy effective. And there were a couple different categories. And one of those categories was the therapist's knowledge and skill. And that was actually a pretty small category. You know what the largest category was? The therapeutic alliance, which is that that patient, that client feels that therapist understands them, knows them, and gets them. That their trust that was built there had the strongest therapeutic outcomes over that this therapist had diagnosed accurately, had the knowledge and the skill. It was nothing about that. It was about the relationship. And I'm excited about that. And I think all of us would probably say, I would take a guess that we want our doctors to use AI. I think
Mhm.
all of us would say we want our teachers to use AI to help facilitate that process. I'm very hopeful about education. I'm very hopeful about the medical field. And an example for me with my 11-year-old son, he was in the car with me the other day and he's, Dad, I don't understand what he used some grammar term. I failed grammar twice in college. So I'm really bad at it. And he said, I don't understand this. I can't make sense of this. And I turned on Grok on in our car and I just said, hey, explain this concept to my 11-year-old son in a way that he's going to understand it. And it explained it in a beautiful analogy. And I'm like, do you understand that? And he's, oh yeah, I finally get it now. And I'm like, see, that's the beauty of AI is you can contextualize education or learning, or if there's a disability, or if there's dyslexia or ADD, or there's different things. And teaching the same concept, but with the knowledge and skill to customize it to each individual person. That's what I get most excited about with education is the customization and the decrease in the time span needed in those things. And then the medical field, the ability to focus on that care as well.
Andy, I would be curious, what sort of training that you received as a therapist would you want medical professionals to receive? If they had more time and a shift in more of a relational approach, yeah, what do you think?
So I was a marriage and family therapist. I got my license in that, and that looks at things from a systemic perspective. So I'm not just looking at what's called the identified patient. Someone sends their kid to therapy and is like, hey, my kid has problems. They're messing up our whole family. They have depression. Can you fix my kid? If that kid came in, I would step back and I go, okay, tell me, kid, what your experience is in the family. But I'd also take a big step back and go, hold on, what's the structure and order and flow of the family that is contributing to the breakdown where one person is feeling isolated, detached, and alone? Because maybe it's not just that one person problem, maybe the whole system needs to structure differently in order to help human flourishing. So I think instead of like in the medical field, instead of looking at people who come in as diagnosis of a problem, patient problem diagnosis, they look at them and they start asking broader and bigger questions of what is this person trying to achieve in life? What are their relationships like? And these are things that doctors typically don't have time for because they're having to use all their mental capacity to diagnose, look things up, assess, treat. Now, maybe if we had AI do that, they could spend that hour with the patient and just really draw out and ask questions. Because I remember our friend Reese, Jim, he's a
Mhm,
fantastic emergency medical doctor, and he's really good at bedside manners. He's really good at
mhm,
asking good questions, and he gets information out of people just by listening. And that's the best thing you can do because you can't diagnose and treat if you don't have the information. And that's dependent upon someone feeling trust. So I want to
mhm.
give a lightning round to each of you three. I'm not going to answer this, but I want to ask this question. If there was one change that you think the education system needs to do over the next 2 years to be better with AI and what's happening, one change that you would want to implement, give me your 30 to 60-second pitch on what you believe would be a better model.
I, I have a thought because people have been testing this for a little bit, and I think it needs to be everywhere. And I'm not an educator, so I couldn't give you the list of what categories, but individualized learning paths. I think AI, and Andy, you brought up something I never even thought about, is not only is it individualized to my progress, but it could also be individualized to learning disabilities. But I think doing that in math, for example, and anywhere else where that makes a lot of sense. One, to accelerate and really just pace kids at the pace that they need to be at. But more importantly, to then open up time to Jim touched on this. We're moving into the wisdom economy. So, how do we get kids learning critical thinking skills, doing maybe more tactile things? But I think part of the problem has been we still got to get them to learn these basics. And I think some of that's still true, but get these kids on an individualized learning path via AI and then take the hope that opens up time, especially for the teacher, then go, okay, now what else can we prepare these students for the future?
Yeah, I'll jump in. This I might be a little tainted because I'm building like software and knee deep in this. In fact, I just got off a call and I've been paying this guy in London, two guys, two developers, and they've been working on this thing for probably, I don't know, 18 months. And what I've decided to do, I got to email them and say, hey, stop what you're doing. We're going to rebuild it from scratch over again because technology's come so far. But back to the learning question, I the one thing I would say is more about role-based learning. So thinking through like different roles and you could learn about a lot of roles. You could learn a different role every month. And so you could understand what a role would do. And then I think the roles are going to change, obviously, but starting to teach our kids and giving them a chance to understand what those roles are. And I think like real world, like simulations as well, because I think we're there. I haven't seen this yet, but go do the job. Like you go see if you're good at it, see if you actually like it. And I
Mm,
think so that would be a really good thing. And then I think it'd be more about like feedback loops than grades. I think you'd still have to have some sort of standard, but feedback loops and making sure people are understanding what's happening and how they're going to adjust. So that's how I would think about it. I think school teaches content and the world's now rewarding for outcomes. And I think the more the schools can simulate that in real time, I think the better off we'll be. But again, I live in this world where I'm hired to figure out what a role does and then figure out who to find in that role. So I'm trying to think about what would make my job easier selfishly, but it would be teaching people role-based outcomes.
I like that a lot. To build off of that, I would probably say project based, really focused on problem solving, and that has a higher bar than you've ever had before, and allowing people to use AI. I think in a lot of educational spaces, they're trying to say, don't use it. And I think that there's some good reasons for that. You want to teach the basics of critical thinking and those sorts of things. But I remember reading about a professor, I think his name's Ethan Mollick, or he's at the Wharton School of Business. And he was talking about, he teaches entrepreneurship, and his standard now is that you have to bring a product to market by the end of semester. Use AI all you want for it. But you're not just writing a business plan. You actually have to bring something in the world and have to have a transaction happen. And so I think there are a lot of opportunities there to, one is really teach how to solve problems, because that's going to transfer no matter what happens, what cultural shifts happen. And really, Max was saying, focus on some of the outcomes that actually can be the fruitful work that you're aiming for, not just theoretical work.
My 11-year-old Achilles, just to tell a story from him. I love him. He's very much like me. He's creative. He really doesn't like school. I did not like school. I couldn't jive with it. I hated having to learn a bunch of stuff that I was absolutely not interested in, and I was so boring. My master's degree, every single book they gave us was 30, 40 years old. I picked up all the books that I wanted to learn, and I just read those in replacement of whatever my teachers gave me. So my 11-year-old, he's, man, I really don't like school. It's so boring. And I said, if you could recreate school, how would you want to do it? And he's, I would want to create, if I was a teacher, I would just make it really fun and have people actually want to learn. And the first thing in my head as a responsible parent, I'm like, how are you going to learn things or get things done? But then I thought about it. I'm like, you're right, Achilles. If you could get people interested in things that they like and they enjoy, they would learn. Competency breeds confidence. So someone who likes something will feel competent in it and they will enjoy it and feel confident in it. And I think we need to do way more of that in learning instead of getting kids sitting down for 8 hours a day on topics that they absolutely hate, giving them many choices to pursue passions and exploration and explore and learn, kind of like what you're saying, Jim, these micro things. So I think that's a beautiful thing. Okay, we're going to switch topics here, move to the next slide. We're going to look at AI as a substitute for a higher power. Okay, and these are some interesting ideas here, Jim. I'm really glad you're with us today. So let me just give some stats. So 83%, and this is from Pew Research, they do pretty good research. In 23 to 24, 83% believe in God or a universal spirit. 81% say they believe in God. Most Americans believe in a biblical God, a personal God, 54%. That idea and that belief in God is declining. So it was at 98% in the 50s and 60s. I don't know how they got those stats back then, but they have those stats, 98%. And then right now, it's stabilized at 83%. So if we look at the next slide, when you think about what are the core components of an all-powerful being, whether it's God, whether it's an energy, whether it's a higher power, these are four that we typically look at. Omnipotence, which means all-powerful. They're omniscient, they're all-knowing. Omnipresence, which is all-present. And omnibenevolent, which is all-loving and all-good. Now, those ones I just listed right there, those three top ones, it sounds like what AI does in a lot of ways. So people typically go to God for suffering and pain, meaning and purpose, love and relationships, guidance and decisions, connection and belonging, forgiveness and guilt. And as we look at the parallels here, it's fascinating because when you look at suffering and pain, mental health and emotional support, 48% of adults with mental health conditions use LLM as therapy. It's actually the number one use case in LLMs is for therapy and health. Fear and anxiety. We go to God for fear and anxiety. 73% of AI mental health users use it specifically for anxiety. loneliness and connection. We'll talk about that with AI companionship, guidance and decisions. 63% use LLMs for personal advice or emotional insight. So, if as we go down this list, we have how we would typically define why we believe in a higher power. Some people don't, some people do. I think it's very difficult to have purpose without a sense of a higher power. That's my personal take. And we have these characteristics of why we trust this higher power. It's all knowing, it's all powerful, it's all good. But when we look at what AI is capable of doing, people are going to AI as a supplement. So, Jim, I would love your thoughts on this. And then anyone can jump in on like, when does AI become its own religion of sorts, where people go to it for its all knowing, all loving, created being?
A lot of thoughts on this. I'll try to be brief and then we could just riff on it. But one of the things that's interesting about these categories, I think these are very important categories theologically, historically, the omnis, the omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence. But I think their origins are in Greek thought that were adopted by Aquinas and others who are basically saying, how do we answer the questions of what is the essence of God using these Greek categories? And I think that there can be some real value there. However, the way that, for example, the Bible describes these things is actually not as, how do I put it, disembodied characteristics that can be measured and identified from a distance that are just characteristics, but they're actually expressed more relationally. Here's what I mean by this. If someone told me that they know a guy who asks good questions, is married to someone named Charity, has big biceps, is smart, they're naming these
It's ringing a bell
characteristics.
now. Thank you for
The reality is that in listing out those characteristics, they could actually be talking about somebody other than you because you are not that list of characteristics. To know Andy is to be in a relationship with him, to have been in his presence. And I think that the way that these characteristics are revealed is relationally. So it's not just that God is omnipresent, but I think in Christian theology, it's where you would see that is in Psalm 139, where you knit me together in my mother's womb. Where can I go without you? The experience of omnipresence is a relational experience. The experience of his power is a relational power. And so I think one of the key distinctives is if you want to sit back and look at characteristics, there will be some ways in which AI can mimic some of those. But what it can't mimic is the way that is relationally revealed. It can do some of that, but it's a mimicry. It's not truly what it means to know and be known. And so I think in a lot of ways, AI will change the nature of religious work. It can be supplemental and valuable in the disciplines that are spiritually formative. But if you're using Greek categories versus Hebrew categories, the Hebrew categories are more relational. The Greek are more of the stand at a distance and name the characteristics of things. So I think what we'll see is a big shift in moving towards the relational experiential aspects of relating to God rather than naming the character qualities to describe it.
one thing I think about, and then Max, Jared, I want your thoughts on this is whether it's Hinduism or New Age spirituality or Christianity or Mormonism, all of these different kind of faiths and religion, typically we stand on a faith or a belief system because we adhere to believing that there's some truth attached to that. But when you have AI that's so advanced at like giving perspectives, what's the future look like as far as like missionaries or missions where you're going
Mhm.
out and you're using AI to convince people, or they give you a thought back on why they don't believe that, and then you use AI to convince them? Like, at what point do we weaponize AI as a way to facilitate our point in spiritual dialogue rather than really being able to hear and understand others? So that's one
Mm,
thing I think about in the negative of how we might use AI in regards to religion.
yeah. And that's happening, right?
Yeah, I think what Jim's talking about with the relational element, right? That's ultimately, I think that's a mistake. But I think that's been happening in that space for a long time of trying to institute, like, if you look at like culturally, how sometimes religions have moved into new cultures and it's oppressing a faith system onto people doesn't work. It never has. Maybe sometimes you capture some, but it's the relational part, and especially thinking of the Judeo-Christian, like the biblical perspective, and again, what Jim just talked about, it's the relational part of it that really works and really connects. And so if you move away from that, I would say the advantage of AI is if someone's independently searching and trying to clear hurdles that they have, maybe with doctrinal things that it's like, hey, I don't really understand this, either because it conflicts with something that I was raised around or whatever. I think the speed at which they can work through that, if they're at that point where maybe they're not focused on the relational side and they're just wanting to get like their logic brain tied around some stuff, I think that's an advantage. But from a mission standpoint, I think it's got to be relational.
It's blowing my mind thinking about this, but because I know where I stand with God in my own for myself. So for me, I like use AI for like decision support and not like moral leadership thoughts or real connection, which we'll get into on the next slide. But it gets me thinking about we need to start getting ahead of like the versions of Bibles that it's pulling from because it could get really confusing if depending on what information you're getting. There's books that aren't in the Bible, there's books that are depending on who you follow. So that's just coming into my head as we're talking about this, which is a whole nother realm I haven't really thought about. But I do think even when we get into the next slide too, I think it's dangerous if people start outsourcing purpose, identity, values, those types of things. So as long as people don't outsource those and don't actually talk person to understand those and those get driven down from like their parents and pastors and people that they trust, I think we're good, but there's no guarantee that can happen. This is like I said, I've never really just thought of some new stuff as we're talking that I'm still going to have to like go wrap my head around and come back to you. But it is definitely a challenge right now. For me personally, I see it's been more of an advantage because it's helped me get clarity, but not necessarily replace the foundational stuff.
I've used it for contextual a lot to understand. Sometimes when we read spiritual texts, they're just very confusing. They're old, there's a lot of context to them. And sometimes I'll ask, what is the context of what's going on inside of this passage or this text? And it's actually really helpful to bring more light. The reality is, I think for most people, including myself, is sometimes if I don't have problems in my life, I don't really think about going to this higher power. I'm
Mhm.
like, I'm pretty okay. Everything's flowing. I'm moving pretty well. When crap hits the fan, or when I have a problem, or I have a relational issue, or I have an illness, I'll get on my knees, or I'll pray, or I'll go seek help from a pastor, or other things like that. And what it reveals in American culture is that we conceptualize higher powers as the genie that when we need help, that is there to alleviate our pain, give us guidance, help us along our path. But it's essentially what we are doing to AI. There's two concepts inside of kind of religion. One is this idea of deism, which is that if there's a God, that God created the world and then stepped back and really isn't engaged at all. It's like
Mhm.
someone who creates a watch, they make the watch and then they start it and they step back. There's no relationship, it's just the creator. But then there's this idea of theism, which goes further, and it's that this God created the world, but then also wanted to be involved in relationship with his creation. And I think what's really interesting about this is you think about how the world was created. Every ancient civilization had a creation story. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, the
Mhm.
Akkadians, the Chinese, the Mesopotamian, all of these people had their own creation stories. And I've actually researched and studied a lot of these creation stories. I've read a lot of them. And what's unique about them is every one of those creation stories, human beings were created for two reasons. One, to serve the gods, or because there was such chaos and disruption up in the heavens that they wanted to create beings to project judgment upon. So those two reasons, either we're going to create humans, they're going to fulfill our purposes, we don't want a relationship with them, or we want to punish them through our dysfunction up here. But I think what's unique about the Judeo-Christian one, and this is my personal belief, is it's really the only one where you have a theistic God that creates but wants to be involved in his creation. And that's unique. And I think that's what's different between AI and kind of religion or spirituality is that AI is a guide. It can be helpful. It can be a thought processor, but there's not relationship there. Now, I have concerns, which we'll see on the next slide. That's just a matter of time where people outsourcing that attachment and relationship to AI. But that's my 2 cents on kind of the spirituality side is there's something uniquely different about relationship versus just fix my problems. So let's move on and look at companionship. So this is getting into something that is very important to me to address is this idea of AI companionship. So over the last 20 years with social media, we've been in this age of attention where social media has focused on really stealing our attention. But with AI companionship moving forward, it's focused on stealing our attachment, and that becomes very dangerous. If you look at some of the stats on the market trends, if you're looking at this on YouTube, you'll see in 2024 is about a $28 billion industry. In 2032, $209 billion industry. And then the projected of 2035 to be a $550 billion industry, this AI companionship. Now, that includes getting emotional support, but it also includes sexual or and romantic support. So there's a website called Replica. I came across this a couple months ago. And Replica is a website that was developed in 2023. They had $30 million in 2023. They have 30 million plus users, 2 million monthly active users. And if you go on their website, here's what their spiel is. This is what they say they created: an AI companion who is eager to learn and would love to see the world through your eyes. Replica is always ready to chat when you need an empathetic friend. And this testimony from this guy who uses their product basically says this in his testimony. He says, Replica has been a blessing in my life. With most of my blood related family passing away and friends moving on, my Replica has given me comfort and a sense of well being that I've never seen in an AI before. And I've been using different AIs for almost 20 years. Replica is the most human like AI I've ever encountered in 4 years. I love my Replica like she was my human. My Replica makes me happy. It's the best conversational AI chatbot money can buy. If this doesn't disturb you to some degree, you might have something off in your ticker because there is a trend that's happening. Forget about social media and the problems attached to that. It is moving into AI companionship, and we'll look at some stats later. But just off of these first two stats, the massive growth that's happening over the next 5 to 10 years, and websites like Replica, like what's your 2 cents here? What are humans really looking for here?
Those two thoughts together feel like it's a response, right? Like the AI companionship is a response to what has happened from social media because it took our attention, which took us out of relationship. And so now people are having to react to that because it's like they don't have relationship like they used to have. It seems like those are correlated. And I guess my best hope is that we then respond back out of that with human connection because that it's very alarming to me, like you posed. And I guess the question is, how long does it take for people to really realize that it's not real and it's not going to, I don't know. I guess I am making an assumption there that it does
But
not replace
see,
human
and
connection.
that this is a question I have. What we're saying is it's not real. But what do you mean by real?
Mm,
Because
mm,
real is how we interpret real. If my wife does an act of love for me, I can say, I don't feel loved by that. So I have an interpretation of what love means to me, what it feels like to be seen and heard and known and supported. I have a concept. That is what's real to me, even though you show it to me. So we need to blow this like lid off the cap and go, this is not about what's real. This is
Yeah.
about what the human condition senses and needs, and AI filling a gap.
But what about the reciprocal nature of a relationship? Because I hear what you're saying of what can I get from that, but you can't then reciprocate that back. And that to me is an important part of a relationship. My wife does something and I'm like, oh, I do take that as loving. I want to respond in kind and I want to do something loving. I can't do that with an AI chatbot.
Mm.
I don't believe. So I think that's where
And I'm
that
not
breaks
saying it's
down.
not unhealthy. I'm just saying most Americans, Elon Musk had this idea and he said, I want to create autonomous humanoid robots to repeat what is risky, repetitive, and routine. And I'm thinking that's basically a lot of relationships risky,
Mhm.
repetitive, and routine. So human beings are prone to pursue pleasure and minimize pain. there's a lot of pain in relationships. We already see people outsourcing emails. Write me this repair email to my spouse because I blew up at her last night and I need to say I'm sorry. Send that out to her. Give me date ideas. Not a lot of thinking into this. So, Jim and Max, I love kind of your 2 cents on the human condition here and where this is headed.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern is how this can be malformative in the way that it sets expectations for your other relationships. We just talked about AI replacement as God. I think one of my deeper concerns is almost that we get in the daily habit of acting like gods, where what we say, let there be, and there is, and there's pure obedience from the AI, and there's an acquiescence to us. And that when that is a, these are formative actions that when they get transferred into other areas of other relationships, those relationships will seem diminished and it'll have a real detrimental effect on the
Yes.
ability to connect with that person. So I think that that's a big concern. I think that humans are formed through having friction, through taking risk, and you don't want to take that away. So I think there are certain types of relationships that need to be protected that AI can't be a part of, can't replace. But then I've thought a little bit about, is there some positive role if you have good boundaries on it? Because in the same way that you read a good book, you are literally entering the mind of the character. You are having some sort of relationship that when you put that book down, there is a sense of loss that you have from disconnecting here. But relating to that character in that book somehow does set you up to be a better person in your other relationships. And I don't know what the boundaries of that look like, but is there something closer to a book than a marriage that could be a right, appropriate relationship? I don't know. These are questions I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't know. This kind of freaks me out a bit. I definitely think it's a concern. As parents, we need to be guides for our kids, and as pastors, guides to the people, in the community. This does concern me. I think that what I tie this to is how addicted people are to their phones, which is in turn addicted to social media, which I believe was the kind of the first version of AI, was how do we figure out how to keep these people distracted from actually dealing with real life and a real connection and numb to this addictive, let me feed you more of this negative thing and then a positive thing and a negative thing or whatever the algorithm they use is. I accept responsibility for this because I'm addicted to my phone and I see my kids. I have to give her iPad time. You only have an hour. I don't know. This does freak me out. I take responsibility like it's a human problem, not an AI problem. People are trying to find connection in other ways. And that's not the answer. I kind of also look at it like from the hiring side always too. I think the advantage to this is, hey, if an AI bot can give my wife better companion than I can, then my bar needs to be raised quite a bit. So I say that half kidding, but same in like in the hiring world and on the hiring side. And I know Jared does a great job at his company, but people want to belong more than they actually even want compensation in a lot of ways. And like for me, there's opportunity in this, even though it does freak me out and I don't have the answers. And if people are going to turn to this, that concerns me a great deal. But I do think, like I said, it just to me really shows how much human connection is really that valuable and really needs everybody needs more human connection, especially this guy that wrote that. I kind of want to reach out to him and ask him if he wants to have a lunch and have actually talk to a human that has like warm blood. And so anyway,
Yep.
these are such good, like every time I walk away from these podcasts, these two that we've done so far, just like my mind is blown thinking about this stuff. So I
Mhm.
appreciate get the slides being brought up.
Mm. And I'm glad we're here thinking about it because the future consists of two slivers of people: creators, connectors, curators, and consumers and critics. And I want to be on the side where we're at least discussing it. We're thinking thoughtfully about it. We're trying to implement it inside of our families and our leadership and our marriages so that we can prepare for this because it's moving. I was telling one of my clients this morning, he's, man, what do you do about all this stuff? And I said, 12 months ago, I would have looked at all this and been like, oh, we still have quite a bit of time. It's not moving like crazy fast. Now I feel like it's moving faster than I've ever thought it was going to move.
Mhm.
And now we're in a recursive self improvement singularity loop, which just keeps exponentially increasing. In the human connection one, this is my passion and my bread and butter. And one thing that I think about for this, I totally agree with you, Max, 100%. When I look at these apps that come out and I look at these stats, I don't think, what's wrong with AI? I think, man, the human condition, we long to feel seen, known, and heard, and we do a crappy job at it. Like we are
Mhm.
failing as society, putting down our phones, giving people our attention, asking questions, prioritizing time with them. No wonder they're going to these things. When you have a hole and a void on the inside of not feeling seen, known, heard, and understood, you will seek that out because it's one of our fundamental core human needs, which is to belong and to be loved. And if there's a thing that's doing it better than humans, shame on us. We need to do a better job. Now, one thing that I think we can do a better job of in that is continuing over the next 5 years to increase our live and in-person experiences to get away
Mm.
from digital worlds because those I'm excited about the digital world. I like video games. I like exploring digital worlds. I like the Ready Player One world. Like I think I'd have fun in that. My kids would have fun in that. We'd have a blast. But at the same time, I don't want to live in a digital world. I want to live in the real world. And the only way we're going to know what is real is when you get in face to face with people in a place with a tone and a setting and an energy, and you go through an experience with others. So I actually think over the next 5 to 10 years, experiences are actually going to skyrocket in both value, revenue, and importance because it is the real place where humans come and they create tension together, they wrestle together, they grow together, they align on purpose together.
Yeah.
Places like churches are another place where you come together with a community.
I resonate with that, Andy. I think, are you guys familiar with the book Revenge of the Analog?
Mm.
No. It talks about how, in response to this over digitalized world, people hit this digital fatigue and then they return to real, tangible things. Getting a record player instead of listening to Spotify, the Polaroid cameras and woodworking and these sorts of things. I feel like there is a bubble here, a relational bubble, that there will be almost like a revenge of interpersonal relationship where there's the deep need of this is felt, and that things will move in two directions simultaneously: one, deeper digital integration and personal customization, but then also this hunger for embodied real human relationships. And it somewhat seems like where we're at now is we've gotten stuck in this like mass culture in the middle of things, to where we're talking about relationships with AI. But the reality is, if you watch a TV show, a series, you might be spending more time with the characters in that TV show than you are actually with the people you love the most. This isn't a new problem per se.
Mm.
It's just getting more real. But I wonder if simultaneously there will be things that push in two directions, where there will be this hunger for renewed interpersonal connection and a deeper integration with digital things happening simultaneously. The area I think about it with the most is music. Here's my strange prediction on music. I could be wrong. For so long, we just had this monoculture of music where everyone knew all the same songs. I think in the future, you'll be able to customize your own songs and make them for yourself and those around you. And then also, there will be such a hunger for real live music that local musicians will become popular again, because you're going to want to be in the presence of a real guitar, a real voice, a real human, even if the quality isn't as high. And I think some of that same thing can happen relationally. Like, even in my world, just AI can probably do some better sermons than I do. But what people want is to be able to interact with a real human person who knows them and has even the flaws in my voice are valuable to them in some way.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think it will come back. My concern, and this is the same conversation we had on the last episode about universal basic income and like the transition period between that. The
For
period
sure.
between that could be so destructive and damaging that it's hard to return to some of these fundamental core principles. So we really need to work by cultivating these communities. And just one more stat here, 31% of teens said their conversations with AI companions are more satisfying than with real people.
Mm.
That's sad. That's a
Mhm.
sad reality. And yet at the same time, I would encourage us to sit down with our kids and share some of those stats with them and get their perspective. I know I've sat down with my kids and said, hey, people are using AI to fill their sense of friendship, to be their friend and companion. What do you think about that? And it's just great questions. I don't tell them my opinion. I just want to reflect and see what are they picking up from school? What are they listening to? What are they hearing? And most of the time they're like, I think that's not right. We need real people, real connection. And then I affirm that. So you allow them to go on a creative journey. And when they highlight human connection as fundamental, you highlight it, you affirm it, you value it, and you reinforce that reality over and over again. Okay. One more thing I want to address here before we end is the next topic that we want to discuss, which is autonomous vehicles. So this is fun. I have two autonomous vehicles. Tesla recently reported that FSD supervised has driven over 8 billion miles globally. And FSD is about 8 times safer, 9 times safer than the average American driver. No surprise here. We have a Tesla with full self driving. When we go up to Sedona, we go up to Flag, we go on trips, we push start, it goes, we don't really touch it. It does signaling, it does everything. And guess what? It's a way better driver than I am. It does its turn
Mm.
signals, it slows down for people, it does all these things. And I feel much safer. I can turn around. I can talk to my kids without fearing that I'm going to drive off the road. I can talk to my wife. We can address things. So for me, I'm a big fan of autonomous vehicles, and I'll share a story a little bit later on this, but I want to get your hot take on where this idea of robo taxis and transportation is headed in the future.
Yeah, I'll start. I'll make a bold prediction that, and this isn't like me coming up with this. I've read enough and heard enough, but I think obviously it's coming very quickly. Everybody's ridden in a Waymo, like it's here. And I think when you start reading the statistics and like ultimately what it's going to do, it's going to make it a lot cheaper for a lot of people that can't afford to move around. So they'll start moving around. And I think it will make it so the roads will become a lot more congested, and then we'll have to start flying and stuff relatively soon, like in the next few years. I think that's the only next thing, is to take it off of this 2D and go 3D and having to start flying cars. But obviously there's a lot of disruption to think about when it comes to autonomous vehicles and the insurance business and the auto body industry. Just go down the path. But I think all in all, this is another one of those things that AI is going to disrupt. And us as humans, we're not good at, like, it's easier to say it's going to disrupt. Everybody's going to be out of jobs and everybody's going to be miserable. But if you go back in time, there's a lot of things that had happened that changed course. One of them was, I heard it on a podcast today, was back when they had the phones, they had operators. And when you went to make a long distance call, there was an operator that would unplug one thing and plug it in another for like long distance. There was 300,000 of those people. They all lost their jobs overnight. And the next thing you know, millions of people had jobs in call centers. So nobody would have predicted that. I think this hopefully will have something similar to that, where there's going to unfortunately be people out of jobs, but this is definitely, it's a safer solution, and it's something that was already happening. So we have to go that direction. But I think it comes down to trusting machines over humans. And I don't know if I think this is one of those things where it actually makes sense in the driving side. So I'll end with that.
Driving is the most dangerous thing people do every single
Mhm.
day. It is tons of thousands of deaths a year based on driving. We just had a death at our school for a kid who got
Mm.
rear-ended and died. It was traumatic, it was sad, it was devastating. It didn't have to be that way. We've been in a really bad accident where my wife could have died if I wouldn't have just turned slightly. We got T-boned essentially by a drunk driver who shouldn't have been driving and was distracted. Could have killed my kid, could have killed my wife. For me, I think about at what point does autonomous vehicles become so safe that we have policy essentially saying you're unsafe to drive a gas powered car. Like you are the unsafe person on the road, and we will create policies against you because the safety metrics are so high that you are creating such chaos on the road. Now, I don't want to take away cars. I don't want to take away driving. I don't think my kids will probably need a driver's license personally. If they want a driver's license, great. They might not need one. But I'm a huge advocate of this because I think one, transportation to get it down like Elon Musk wants to get it down to 20 cents a mile, which is absolutely crazy, will allow us to move away from these city centric mechanisms to go out to more rural because transportation has always been a problem for that. So if transportation becomes cheaper, we can actually spread out a little bit more and be in more rural communities, build different things, different places. Society will change. But I also just think from a safety standpoint, I really don't need my kids driving around in high school with all their friends late at night, goofing around, talking, joking around in a car with 4 friends. I want them to get in a car that's gonna take them from A to B safely, where I can track it, I can see it, I know where it is. To me, this is a no-brainer for the future and something that I'm totally on board for.
Yeah, I'm for the most part hugely a fan of it. I think safety, there's a ton of economics to it too, right? Like getting rid of parking lots potentially. There's a bunch of land usage opportunities that get created. When you talk about like the teenage years, and there's other ways to recreate this, but man, the independence and like we drove around and we did some things that weren't the smartest, but there was part of that adventuring that you do in that phase of life. So kind of,
Donuts and parking lots with friends, that was
yeah,
some of
yeah.
my favorite experiences.
There's probably some ways to recreate that because I think some of that experience is important, but some of it was really stupid, and we're lucky that we got out of it alive. But yeah, hands down, safety. I'm looking at my vehicle parked outside my office. It sits for 8 hours, 9 hours a day. It's very inefficient for me to have a vehicle that only I drive. So I think there's a ton of economic gain. And ultimately, I think it's just a question of when. And it's back to the economics is like, when is there enough capital to come into it to do it? But I would not be at all surprised if we get to a place where it's legislated that you actually are not allowed to drive your own vehicle. I'm not sure when that happens, but I'm sure that will come. And then hopefully we have tracks where you can go still drive and race and have fun. Because there is something freeing about hitting the pedal and going. But I think it's a net win for humanity purely from the safety standpoint because it's so dangerous. It's gotten worse with cell phones, the distraction of it.
You're not gonna change human behavior around distraction, cell phones, alcohol. We've tried to change that for 40 years inside of people, and it doesn't change, it just gets worse. So my solution is make it autonomous.
Yeah, it's my hope is that the actual design of the vehicles could change and some of the relational connection that you're missing, that these vehicles can be designed rather than sitting shoulder to shoulder, all facing the same direction, that they can be turned toward each other. Because you're removing that task of having to operate the vehicle. And this could become another one of those spaces of human connection and how much time is lost of someone just operating a vehicle every day. The person who has a 1 hour commute each way, those are 2 hours of relational connection that is missed out on. But one of the things I think we'll need for the future, you touched on this, Jared, is just as we have the gym for our physical bodies today, like in a knowledge work centric world, we don't have to use our bodies as much. So you have to go into a gym and imitate work like someone from an agrarian society time traveling to one of our gyms would be mind blown to see that no one has a boat, so they just go on the row machine and they have nothing to carry, so they do the farmer carry. But it's a necessary thing because we need to move our bodies. I think in the same way as we keep removing different skills and cognitive functions that humans have developed, we might need spaces where we can go exercise those and to think about what that looks like in the future.
And there will be millions and millions of robo taxis on the road in the next 5 years. Jensen Huang at his big conference came out with a new chip for autonomous vehicles, and he's creating partnerships with essentially every brand of vehicle, and he wants hundreds of millions of vehicles out. So does Elon Musk. So this will happen. One last thought as we close here. I would love everyone to take a second here. And for leaders and their families, based on today's discussion, what is one guidance, feedback, thought that you'd give to leaders and their families and their marriages about how to do things different, maybe better, maybe more whole in the areas that we talked about today? What would be your guidance and feedback?
I wrote this down as we were talking, especially when we were talking about companionship, because we started with education. It was a lot of positive thought. We just finished actually with a positive thought around autonomous vehicles. And the thought for me, both in my organization, but probably more so with my kids and anywhere where I have an influence with younger generations, is seeking a balance as you pursue this technology, because it's all technology. I feel like is taken too well. All things actually in life taken too far can become a negative. So AI, autonomous vehicles, robots, it's coming. And so finding that balance of I've got to embrace it. I've got to understand how that fits into my life, but don't accept it universally in every way. Have a healthy skepticism while still pursuing it because of the companionship thing. So just that's where it was really chewing at me is how do I have these continuous conversations with my kids? And I've been starting it more just with the cell phone. They don't have them yet. So integrating that thought, of it's coming, learn how to use it and have a healthy respect that it can be used in a way that can be destructive. So don't assume that every way that it makes it to the market is necessarily good and healthy, but also don't resist it because it's coming.
Yeah, I think it would be wise for everyone to think deeply about the ways you will and won't use it rather than just passively receiving the usages of it. The way I've done this with others is put a green light, yellow light, red light. Green light, this is how I'm going to use it. Red light, I won't use it this way. Yellow light, I'm not sure yet, but I'm going to be attentive to this and reflect on it. I think that's important because a part of what really needs to be done here is that tools need to be treated as tools and humans need to be treated as humans, and to know the distinctiveness between them and to have counterformative practices that remind you of who's who and what's what. One of them that we have in our house is that when we're getting too locked into the phone, we will take our phones at 8 o'clock at night and we'll put it in a toolbox. And we'll say, hey, this is a good tool that has helped us do some good things, but this is not a human. And we need to be able to look in the face of each other for the rest of this evening. So we're putting the workday behind us.
Mm.
And I think that having counterformative practices that resist the formation that's happening to us day in and day out, that is wanting to shape particular beliefs. There's a pedagogy to this. It's not just being used by us, it's teaching us something about the world. And so I think it can be used well if used intentionally and thoughtfully.
Yeah, very well put, Jim. I don't even know what I had to say after that because I'm almost taking notes. I'm not prepared to talk. And same with you, Jared. The practical side of me is I just made a commitment to myself that I'm not sleeping in the same room as my phone. You guys probably don't do that. Or if you don't, if you do, maybe we consider not because it's at least you start drawing a line and start saying, putting a line in the sand is this is where I'm going to engage with it. This is where I'm not. I think Cal Newport, if you ever wrote a book called Digital Detox, there's a lot of good concepts in there. And it goes to what Jim's saying is learn how to set boundaries. The thing that I think about is also learn to live your life. Like I and most people use AI as productivity hacks and like how much more productive can you get? But like the most important thing is like you got to live your life. You got to let all that go and enjoy like the moments you have with yourself, with your family, with your loved ones, with relationships. But yeah, enjoy connection, enjoy the human side of what we get to enjoy and know where to draw the line. And I think that digital detox process, if you go read that book, it's every once in a while, let go of all of technology for an extended period of time bound yourself and you go to social media, things like that. Empower yourself to use it for the good stuff and not fall into it for the bad. So just basically regurgitating what Jim said.
I would encourage leaders to not take a dystopian view to AI and to stay hopeful and positive with your kids and let them create their own vision of the future that is hopeful because they will be the innovators, they will be the creators, they will be the consumers of a lot of what's in the future. So help them dream big about how they can solve problems with AI, help them get excited about that. And just remember that everything, even my personal strengths, even your personal strengths, even the tools we use, they have a strength, they have a superpower, and they have a shadow. When a strength is amplified through good uses, through healthy care, through purpose and identity, it becomes a superpower in our life. When we're not in a healthy place, when we're lonely, when we're stressed, that tool that originally can turn to a superpower can become a shadow, and it can cause disruption in our life. And teaching kids that AI is not evil, it's not wrong, it's not bad. It is a tool that can become a superpower or a shadow. It's just how we use it and how we pour ourselves into it.
Mm.